We are live.
We are live. Uh-oh. Good afternoon, Vegas! All right, now I need to hear you guys respond in kind. Come on.
She's announcing a boxing match later, if you didn't know.
It's just I've done it every year I've presented at MMS, and it's just my gentle way of getting you all in a wakeful state. Anyway, so this is the last session of Wednesday. We're on the downhill slide here. And this afternoon's topic for this session is, of course, surviving the SUP winds of change. SUP standing for Software Update Point. How many folks out there love updates? How many folks look forward to Patch Tuesday? Oh, look. Good for you. Anyway.
Let me introduce you to the Queen of SUP.
Oh, yes. I'm Angie Stahl, if you haven't figured that out yet, a.k.a. the Queen of SUP.
QueenofSUP.com. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the plug, Greg. This roguishly handsome man to my right is Greg Ramsey, also known as Greg the Rockstar Ramsey. And like I say, we're going to be presenting on essentially transitioning your 2007 software update process to Config Manager 2012.
We have been pretty fortunate because for the last couple years, we've been in the early adopter program for Config Manager 2012. So currently, we've got about 8,000 systems in production, so we're actually patching and rolling today. So we thought we'd take what we've learned and share it with you guys.
Yeah, so hopefully it makes for a good story, and you get some good takeaways, and you actually might possibly even start looking forward to Patch Tuesday, although that's a tall order, I understand. So the goals for today, for this afternoon session, is we're going to talk about how we do it and how it's changed, all right? And then we're going to dive into what is known as the secrets of the SUPFU masters. One of the biggest challenges I had in adjusting to Config Manager 2012 is the console has radically changed. So I took a little bit of adjusting. Hopefully we can give you some of those secrets to point out things that aren't always intuitively easily found in the new console. Then we're going to talk about the big game changers, okay? And these are seriously the biggest game changers for software updates. The good news is that essentially under the hood, nothing has changed as far as how a client scans for and applies updates and all of that, you know, under the hood kind of stuff. But Microsoft has actually given us a few excellent improvements that are going to ease some of our software update pain process. Then we're going to get into a little Pirates versus Ninja session about custom updates and how those have changed with the introduction of some new technologies in Config Manager 2012. And then hopefully, after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. We'll see. First, I want to set the stage. Both I and Greg work for a large Fortune 50 company. And essentially, we're also extremely aggressive about patching. We get a lot of customers that come to us and they ask, how do you guys do it? Okay, well, essentially, any critical update that's deployed by MS on Patch Tuesday, we have a security policy that it must be applied to the workstation within 72 hours of that release. So essentially, Patch Tuesday hits 12:05 in the afternoon. We are downloading the catalog from Microsoft, and we are starting our patching process. Essentially, getting the catalog, then, of course, assembling the package in our updates list, etc., and getting ready to deploy. It's been a very rare month in the time that I have been doing patching and updates that we don't get a critical dropped on us. If, for example, we did have an example where we had a critical patch that didn't come down, we do give the business 30-day opt-in, and then it's a mandatory execution. Our non-production server testing commences within 24 hours of the release of those updates. And all of our servers must be patched within 7 days. Again, like I said, in the case of critical updates. And there you see the target numbers that we have in our environment. All right. everybody's very, very familiar with this. This is a drill that all of us do on a monthly basis, okay? Essentially, Config Manager 2007. All of it is manual, hands-on. So a single person in our environment is dedicated from 12:05 essentially until we get down to the release to production of managing the entire software update process. And that generally, we guarantee that we're going to deliver updates and make them available to the business by 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And that's around the world globally. Now, let's take a look at 2012. Considerably shorter process, all right? And let's see why. All right. So essentially, like I said, when I mentioned that ADRs are a game changer, well, essentially they've taken most of the manual heavy lifting that we have to do up front in order to get patches out to our environment. They do all of that via an automatic deployment rule. And of course it runs automatically, so zero touch at that point. The only time when we have to get technicians or engineers involved in the update process is once the ADR has run and created its software update group and its package, distributed its content, then we're going to check that it's done what it's supposed to have done and what we expect it to do. We're then going to validate and test those updates, and then we're going to send it out to production.
The ideal way this works, at least in my vision, is you have these automatic deployment rules configured, and it's targeting a pilot group, and Angel talked about that a little more in a little while, but basically, all of a sudden, that pilot user, somebody on our team, those initial pilot people, they get the blue notification that software updates are available in their system, right? We didn't have to do anything to get it to that point in 2012 now. So that's a huge savings as far as just hand-holding the process like we used to.
And I actually get to have lunch, a nice long lunch on Patch Tuesday, where previously I did not. Essentially, for your clients, for your end users, their perspective, the only thing that they're going to see that's changed from 2007 to 2012 is, all right, the pop-up windows are a bit different here. So let me see. I'm going to try this, and hopefully I don't make you all nauseous. Okay, I thought we had Zoom it. Apparently it's not loaded. Okay, never mind. Anyway, the custom pop-up that everybody gets, the sys tray, hey, you got updates available. And then, of course, you can elect to do an express installation, you know, and we're all very used to that. Or you can do the custom and see which updates are being offered. Of course, that changed in 2012. They get the custom pop-up, of course. Then if they want to view the details, that's probably the bigger or biggest hurdle that you're going to have in educating your end users about updates. Software Center is going to pop up, and it's going to filter on updates. But here's the key takeaway. If your user was going to look at view details to see the list of updates, it's only going to show those updates that have been flagged as required, so only mandatory deployments. It's not going to show you optional updates. The other thing that might throw them off a little bit is obviously, since it is starting up Software Center, Software Center, of course, is a portal or an interface for the end user to see more than just updates. I mean, it's going to be applications. Sorry, not applications. That's
applications,
software.
Packages, yeah, just about anything. Yeah, they'll be, if you target machines, they're going to show in Software Center. So keep that in mind. So software updates don't show in their own GUI, but they can be filtered, as you can see in that bottom right corner there.
All right, and one of my pet peeves, all right, in the 2012, if you're looking at view details and to make a determination, say maybe I want to opt in, you know, voluntarily and apply updates before I get rebooted by a mandatory deadline. So you'll see two install options. On the right-hand corner is install. On the left-hand corner is install all required. I'm sorry, it's one of my little pet peeves because I am more accustomed to going to the right-hand corner and click install. If you click install, it will install the update that you have selected in the list, and it won't install the others.
One other thing to note, you might be asking, can you multi-select? No, you can't in 2012. So if you're someone that did the check boxes in software updates through the GUI, you won't have that. Now, obviously, if you always send patches completely silent, there's probably not much user experience difference here, right? We're going to hide everything.
Right. But we like to encourage our users to opt in early because it's literally with a 72-hour SLA to the business, we want our production end users are actually dog fooding updates. So if we get a showstopper within that 72-hour period, we can pull it out of deployment before we go mandatory.
Our Malaysia offices actually see the update balloon on Wednesday morning their time. So we're really just finishing processes on Tuesday night our time. Malaysia users are logging in and they're getting a pop-up that updates are available.
Right. Okay, and so for us, I think we're all pretty used to, we've seen a lot of the 2012 console. You know, the key differences there is obviously, as you can see, just a quick comparison and pointing out where you're going to find those nodes. A lot less noise in the 2012 console, and a couple of nodes are no longer available, and one specifically deployment templates. But we will show you in one of the demos where deployment templates can be exposed, because they haven't gone away, they're just kind of hidden.
Also, Angie, to point out, there's a top secret version on the left-hand side, Config Manager 20007. Just thought I'd mention that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, my God, and even the guys in the missed it. Woo!
Yep.
Okay.
Oops.
I just thought I'd show you what our 2007 software update node looks like. This is our company node. We're all pretty used to this. We've been using 2007 to patch since, I mean,
we were
beta
in 2007 as well. Oh, don't take pictures of that, please.
No.
Who can top it? Somebody's got to have more than that. Come on.
Yeah, who can top it?
Nobody.
Can anybody else? Nobody?
Nobody wants to admit it anyway. Oh. There's a couple. I see. Oh, no, he's taking a picture. He's not.
All right. And this is our production Config Manager 2012 console. Considerably less cluttered. Of course, we're also attempting to start out with a new environment,
we did
nice
just
and clean.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so now I'm going to hand it over to Greg, and he's going to lay some Foo Master secrets on you.
Foo Master secrets, yeah. So basically, we're going to get in the console here in just a minute, show you a few of the things in the console that are different, things that we just want to make sure you're aware of in Config Manager 2012. Just real quick, who has messed around with Config Manager 2012 and software updates? Cool.
All right.
Good. Good to see so many. All right, go ahead and flip that. And yes. And cross our fingers. There we go. Step one of demos is successful. Aha. All right. So first we're going to just talk for a minute about where we find things in this new console and a couple configuration options. One or two that are new as well we'll mention. I'm going to go into sites, and I'm also going to look at server and site system roles. Actually, let me go to sites first. And I did it again. I have a bad habit of this. I did a right-click properties. I actually want to either go to the ribbon and select settings and go to configure site components, or you can right-click as well.
Took me half a day to find that.
Yeah. Another thing that's interesting to me, and a lot of you are probably more familiar, but you notice in the ribbon, when you get into smaller resolutions, everything kind of combines under that topic. So we've been writing a book on Config Manager 2012, and it's hard to try to tell people, well, if your resolution is smaller, you may not see the same things that you would see otherwise. So just keep that in mind when you see something like this. Hit that down arrow and see what you find. All right, so we're going to go software update point. A lot of this looks the same as Config Manager 2007. We do want to point out this last tab here, supersedence rules. And this is pretty interesting, and I'll explain the scenario after I talk about this. So right now, it's set to don't automatically expire superseded software update until it's been available for 3 months. Now let me explain that a little bit better. This happens to us a lot with time zone patches, because time zone patches aren't security updates, and I don't think they're even marked critical updates, but they're not as visible to us whenever we run synchronizations. So what's happened to us once or twice, we're currently deploying a time zone update, and everything's fine. We run a synchronization, and a new time zone update has been released. It automatically expires that old one, but we didn't catch that a new one had been released, so all of a sudden we're no longer deploying a time zone update. Okay, so this setting will give you 3 months grace period. That's basically what it's doing here. And you can, set this to whatever you want, but it does give you some overlap. There have been some companies where they've been in the process of testing a security patch for a month or two or something like that, and then suddenly they're ready to go to production, but they did a synchronization and that one was superseded, so it's no longer applicable. So this is a setting you can configure in the console if you want to have a little more grace period. So that's pretty handy. Oh, we do want to talk about client agent settings. And I'm just going to open up this. If you haven't seen it yet, you can create custom settings and target collections with those. I've just basically created a test one here. There's a pretty important setting in here that I want to mention. And we'll talk about it a few times and explain why it's important. Let me see if the magic works over here, Angie.
All right.
Nope, not when I'm on full screen. Okay. So basically down here at the bottom it says show notifications for new deployments, true or false. In Config Manager 2007, there were kind of two site settings. One was for software distribution, one was for software updates, right? So in our environment, we use run advertised programs quite heavily. And we always had the site-wide settings configured to not show notification when we add something new into run advertised programs. Because that happens so frequently, we don't want to give the user the pop-up. In Config Manager 2012, we suddenly realized this one setting controls both. So it's very important to realize this, because if you set this to false, to don't show notifications for new deployments, users won't receive pop-ups for software updates either. So, because a software update is a deployment. So just keep that in mind. For some environments, that's perfect, but for others, you're probably going to want to leave this set so that notifications are being displayed. But then you have to remember on your packages and programs, as well as your applications that are being deployed, you need to set the suppress for notifications when you deploy those. Just something, to us, very important to keep in mind. If I recall, I don't think there's anything in particular, but since it's here, no, I don't think there's anything that's particularly new for the software updates config. Okay, let's see. I will mention, I don't have an unhealthy client to mention it right now to at least show you, but under client status for the new client health, if you have a client that's unhealthy for a software update, the automatic update service on the client, if it's not started, disabled, doesn't exist, or something like that, you would actually get that into your client check, so you would see that, and it will attempt to remediate a bit of that as well. But at least you do get some client check related to the automatic update service. And
the client also will report show up if there's a failed update, right, Greg, in the client status?
If it's a failed update, you'll actually go to monitoring and you'll find it in the deployments there. So you'd find it here. And this is just all my deployments. Another hot tip, by the way, when you start working with Config Manager 2012, I often go in here and group this by feature type, and then I can kind of narrow down and see exactly what I'm looking for quite easily. I wanted to mention the single instance store. If you do a lot of software updates in Config Manager 2007 and you patch SQL, you may have experienced where you see multiple of the same file coming down in software updates. Anybody see that, where all of a sudden you got like a 4 gig software update package for the month? Okay, so I just want to mention a couple things about that. When you download updates, that download process is still the same, so you'll see duplicates in your package source wherever you're pointed to. But when you send to distribution points, and that'll all be single instance store at that point. So what you're actually pushing over your WAN and things like that will all be in the single instance store. The other thing that's really great about the single instance store, we're no longer keeping those PCK files on all those remote sites. So if you ever looked in the SMS PKG folder on a primary site, you'd see a lot of those compressed files. In 2012, when those get sent to a primary, they get extracted, put into the single instance store, and then deleted. So our DPs actually in 2012 are significantly smaller than what they were in 2007. Let's see. We did want to mention migration. You can migrate software updates and migrate that content. But as you saw in our beautiful console in 2007, it was just time to clean up. So we actually just started over with what we did in 2012. And then the other thing we wanted to mention, there's sometimes you have software update deployment administrators that you want to ensure that they don't do OSD or anything else, right? Certain people, it's just safer that way. So we did want to mention that there are a couple roles that you can look at, actually particularly one for software updates, software update manager, and that's a role built in. You can obviously customize that, but It works pretty well. Luckily, working through the betas, we gave some feedback and got some things configured. So really, you can give that role to your software update admin and give them the rights to the proper collections that they can target, and they can go to town. One final thing to mention here, Angie.
All right.
This is also new in the console in 2012. You can actually see your software update point synchronization status. If you have multiple sites in 2007, you may have had to go look at logs or even go look at the WSUS console to see if those lower sites have been synchronizing. And you actually have that information in the console now, so that's pretty handy.
Okay.
Back to you.
All right. All right, automatic deployment rules and software update groups, ADRs and SUPs, because these are the game changers. This is really essentially what's going to make your life a lot better as far as the software update process. Now, again, you have to remember with ADRs, I know that Deb McFadden showed in the keynote, click, click, boom, big easy button, deployment out. Unfortunately, those of us in our environments, we don't always have that luxury. A lot of times we don't want to just blindly just blast updates out there. We want to review them and assess and evaluate whether or not there's going to be a problem deploying those updates to our environment and our production systems. And in addition to that, a lot of us, and I know that we do at our company, like to leverage the patching window to also release maintenance updates that aren't security related. And that's often difficult to orchestrate that schedule using an automatic deployment rule.
Now, it is great to get all your content downloaded, get it targeting a test collection, and there is one huge exception where you always just want to automatically go, and that's forefront definitions, right? In Config Manager 2012, and we'll talk about this a little bit in Angie's demo, about how you can just, with automatic deployment rules, you automate that entire process of leveraging Configuration Manager to get those def updates available to your clients.
Right. So within an automatic deployment rule, you're going to be defining detection rules, or what we'd like to call more appropriately search or filter criteria, which essentially the catalog that you're downloading from Microsoft Update, based on some criteria that you give it, it is going to pre-populate updates, select those updates, add them to a software update group, and then it's going to download that content and distribute it based on where you've defined your distribution groups. And then if you elect to have a deployment created or you want to modify a pre-existing deployment, that's what an ADR does for you. Software update group, essentially all it is an update list plus a deployment. No more the concept of an update list, all right? So it's state-based. So the key takeaway that you need to come away with from here is, if you add or remove an update from a software update group that's been deployed to a target collection, you have affected that deployment. Now, that's made me really happy in one way, because I've gone through the challenges of when I need to clean up my update environment. In 2007, I had to go into the package and remove old updates. I had to go into my deployments and remove the old updates there. And of course, if I was really into clean, super clean, I would have gone into my update list and also removed those updates. It's essentially the expired ones. All right, so just be very, very careful of that, because if you do have a live deployment, you could get some unhappy surprises by adding or removing an update. And you can have multiple deployments per update group, so to different collection targets, etc., with different options. So I just wanted to point that out. And now I'm going to try and demo. I have to put on my glasses.
I added Zoom it, by the way, so if you needed it, should magically work for you.
All right, so we're going to go step by step and walk through creating an ADR. And this is super easy, because if I can do it, you guys sure can do it, right?
Even the queen.
Even the queen. All right, so we're going to go into our software library and down to our update deployment rules. And I'm going to go ahead and create an automatic deployment. All right, I'm going to give it a name, something that makes sense to me. Now, when you're naming your ADR, I want you to think about this. When the ADR creates a software update group and the deployment, it is going to use the same name as your ADR. And then it's going to append a date and timestamp when that ADR is scheduled to evaluate. All right? I'm a little picky about this because I would like to be able to have a much clearer delineation between my various deployments and software update groups. And I'm not really in love with this idea that I'm going to have to use the name of the deployment role that I've defined, but that's another story entirely.
Yes, feature request.
Okay, feature request, right. So here is where the deployment template is exposed, where you can elect to apply a deployment template if you've had one that you've saved. And essentially, in order to create it, correct me if I'm wrong, in order to create a deployment template, you can do that via the deployment wizard. It's one of the steps that will ask you towards the end, would you like to save this deployment as a template so you can utilize it for future ADRs, etc.
Correct. The only place you can save or select a template is inside of the wizard. It doesn't appear as a separate node in the console or anything.
All right. Within our environment at our business, we have elected our ADR to target a software test group because essentially what we want is anything that we're going to offer out there to the business, we want to test and validate before we let it touch our production systems.
That's why we always show the example of targeting all systems because it's the best practice. We all do. I'm just saying.
It's a demo box.
It's just funny when watching and you're saying we always test a test group, all systems.
I should have created a test group.
Okay.
Rightly so. This is why you got me on role-based administration control.
Yes.
Anyway.
Safety first. Safety first.
All right. Then you need to elect whether or not you're going to add to an existing software update group. Again, the cautionary note here, remember what I said, if you've got a live deployment tied to a software update group and this ADR runs, the next time it runs, that whatever collection's been targeted for that particular software update group deployment, they're going to get those new updates, all right? So, or you may elect to create a new software update group. So it depends. Down the road, eventually, as you continue to use 2012, you're going to start getting an awful lot of software update groups. So you can make that selection. In our case, we're going to, for Patch Tuesday purposes, we're going to create a new software update group. And here's the little, I want to point this one out. This is your safety net. You can elect to not enable the deployment after this rule is run. So essentially, it's going to create a deployment for you, but it's not going to be active or enabled. So if you do want to use this as something that you're going to use to potentially target production systems, you could always elect to not enable the deployment after the rule is run, check your deployment and your software update group, and then enable it, just as a little safety check. All right, so, oh geez, rats. Demo 1.
Demo 1.
Okay. All right, so your deployment settings, that's pretty much like 2007, nothing much changed there. You can elect to have a wake on LAN sent for required deployments. All right, now the detail level for state messages, just a little note here, you have two choices, minimal and normal. All right, now essentially the way we're dealing with this choice is for a patch, security update, where we have compliance and we're having SLAs that we need to be met for our production environment. We want to set our state message detail level to normal. Those are the state messages that the client's going to send up to the site server so we can be alerted if there are any problems with our clients applying updates from a given deployment. However, you may want to elect your detail level to be minimal in the case of a forefront endpoint protection. If you're leveraging or using that in your environment, because the forefront endpoint protection, it happens to run a heck of a lot more frequently. What is the cycle, Greg?
I think right now Microsoft's recommending every 24 hours. I have to look at docs recently. I think those definitions update 3 times a day, but I think the way we're talking with ADRs right now, it's every 24 hours. Definitely check the docs, though.
Right. All right, and then, of course, we know all about whether or not we want to accept any updates that include a license agreement or a license agreement that's been approved. So that's a pretty standard setting. All right, so here is where we're going to set our property filters and search criteria. This is what we're going to start, start shaving down the update catalog, and we have a specific primary purpose in mind for this automatic deployment rule that's going to create our software update group and deployment. So in our environment, the first thing that we want to do is date released or revised. All All right, and that's one search criteria. And since we know this is a patch, I'm creating my ADR for Patch Tuesday. I want it to run every month. Now, one of the things that I'd like to see changed is a little more granular control over this, because we have noticed when our ADR rule runs on the schedule that we've defined for it, not every month has 30 days. So we are getting some bleed from previous ADR runs of the same rule, where we're getting like the past month's updates repeated in this particular software update group and deployment that this ADR would create. You could try 28 days too, but what if it's a month with 30 days? You see, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're still going to get a little bit of bleed. I would just really prefer to have a little more granularity. All right, and then of course, what we're going to do, you can go through all of these. We try to keep it fairly simple.
Let me ask a question real quick. How many of you have Itanium and Patch Itanium in your environment? That's what I thought. How many of you have embedded in your environment? Hopefully a few of you. Okay, good. Angie's about ready to show you the magic. Angie already showed you the magic.
I did. You want me to explain the magic?
Yeah, you need to zoom into that one too.
Oh.
So this is one of the things we complained about a bit. We didn't want to see Itanium exist anymore, at least in our console. We really didn't care to see it. Automatic deployment rules actually allow you to filter that out a little bit. If you want to click on that again so they can see that GUI with all the text too. I don't know if you can do that while you're, probably not. But you see that magical minus sign at the beginning of the word. Actually click there.
Yeah. All right.
But that's how you can remove things from your ADRs. And that's how we've got it there. So there's a lot of text that gives you a lot of detail there. Greater than, less than, but I don't think it actually, yeah, do not match, so a minus, whatever. So that's pretty handy.
Okay. All right. Oops. I am just, hello. Having trouble with spelling. All right. Now, the interesting thing here too is if you have a multiple values for a single search or filter criteria, it's going to insert the OR operator. So anything that has Itanium or embedded in the title, the end is applied between each one of the property filters. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to do update classification. And I only want security updates, since this is a Patch Tuesday ADR. All right, this is where I'm going to define my schedule. We're going to see a little bit more magic here. All right, I want it to run monthly. I like this. This one made me happy.
We like to please the queen sometimes.
Sometimes, not always. All right, so essentially now I'm going to have it run monthly, the second Tuesday of the month. And, ooh, what's important about this? Thing to take note of here is when you're scheduling your ADR to run, you need to be cognizant and aware of what you've defined your WSync schedule to be, because you do not want your ADR running until your WSync has completed for a given month. If you're too aggressive with the timing of your ADR and your WSync has not completed, you're not going to get the expected results that you expect to see updates in your software update group or in your deployment. So, all right, and the best way to do that is, of course, go into your WSync Manager log, so look at your schedule and essentially see what time it completes from its runtime, and that's all going to be variable based on how many products, et cetera, that you're downloading the catalog for.
And also in this same view, it does show you what your current sync schedule is.
Right. But that's only when it starts. It doesn't necessarily tell you when it completes. Right. So I recommend looking in the log. All right, so, and then our deployment schedule, and in this case, we're going to do time based on client local time, and you got the UTC option. Whether or not we want to make the software available immediately, or if we want to elect to make it available at a specific time, if we want a delayed deployment to allow us time to verify or validate the software update group, or allow the bits to get pushed around the environment. Now, the important thing to note here is Microsoft has given the end user the ability to have a little more control over how they want updates applied to their system, and we'll probably show that a bit later. But essentially, if your end user you've communicated to them and they've elected to apply updates, and define a schedule for it. Any updates made available, the next time that window runs for that particular end user that's defined that, it's going to apply all available updates, okay? So just keep that in mind. And then whether or not we have a specific date and time that we need the deployment to actually be required, so our deadline. Now, in this particular interface, in the ADR wizard, I don't have a lot of granular control, all right? So I'm going to set it to 72 hours. But within our company, our agreed delivery to the business is a very specific point in time. Our required deadline for critical updates at our business is 2 a.m. Friday local time. All right, so I cannot set that in the ADR, but I can in the deployment wizard. I have a lot more granular control. It's an ask item that we have to Microsoft, so hopefully maybe in the next update they'll be nice and give us that. All right, now you want to define the user experience, and as Greg had mentioned before, remember, be cognizant of what you set your computer agent notification setting to, because it's going to trump anything that you elect in this ADR for the software update group and the deployment. In our case, this is going to the testing group, so I want them to display in Software Center, and I also want to show all the notifications. If you want to do a silent deployment, which is probably recommended in the case of FEP, because you don't want to be nagging, you know, our users get very upset when they get the sys tray pop up more than once a month. They really do. So we don't want to nag them too much. So you might want to hide it in Software Center and all notifications if you're doing a FEP ADR, for instance, all right? All right, and then our deadline behavior, we want it to install the updates and restart. I always elect to do this unless this was specifically for a server deployment, or even if it was, we have other methods by which we want to dictate the server restart behavior, but we don't care if we reboot workstations. And a funny story, and this was actually updating with 2007, the CEO of our company was right in the middle of a presentation, and the deadline hit. And he was in the middle, and he didn't have you know, the notifications suppressed, and we didn't have some of that more granular control we have now with 2012, where you can suppress any type of notification while you're in presentation mode. And we rebooted his system. I wasn't working at Dell then. I may be the person who replaced the person who was working at Dell, but I don't know. But anyway, he did tell the audience that's the way it's supposed to work. So. All right, then of course your configuration manager alerts. Surely you've seen this in other sessions before. You can get those in-console alerts that will let you know. We have an agreed SLA to our business that we will be 90% compliant within 7 days. So the defaults actually fit very nicely with our SLA, that we will be 90% compliant as far as having all critical updates applied to our systems. All right, and then of course you've got the old operations manager alerts.
Just a comment on that, Angie, while you're here. Has anybody had trouble with those operations manager alerts, how config manager manages that? They don't seem to work like you expect them to. It's supposed to be fixed in Ops Manager 2012, FYI. It's actually an Ops Manager issue, so.
Okay.
Definitely test that again if you just stop using it in 2007.
All right, and then we're all pretty familiar with our slow boundaries. You know, we've got the fallback content source location, as well as, this is kind of a nifty new change in 2012, is allowing clients to share content with clients on the same subnet.
Right, this is for branch cache, which is supported in Config Manager 2007, but in 2012, it's very granular, so all the different deployments that you can create, you can choose at that point whether or not to leverage branch cache.
All right, and whether or not we want to elect to create a new deployment package or select a pre-existing deployment package. In our case, in our environment, we've decided that we're going to start using, we used to do monthly update packages. Now we're going to classify our update packages by type. So security updates, custom updates, FEP updates, and simply keep glomming stuff in there, simply because of the single instance store. But you can also elect to have a brand spanking new deployment package created if you feel like it. Because the concept of package is drifting away in 2012. All right, and then of course, download location, where we're going to get the updates. If you know, we go to the internet, but you may have an isolated network, so you might want to be downloading it from another location using a UNC path. Our language selection, And click, click, boom. All right. And that is creating an ADR. Now, at this point, we can elect to let it run on a schedule. Okay, but also in the ribbon, we have the option of run now. And again, this drives me a little bit crazy because I'm still trying to reconcile in my mind what I can get right-click and what I cannot, and what I will get in the ribbon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Seems like there's a few things that aren't in both. So.
Yeah, sometimes it trips me up. Anyway, I can elect to let it run now. It is more than likely I'm going to get an error code because we don't have an internet connection up here for this demo box. But essentially, if it did run, all right, here's an example of that. We have a software update group in which we ran earlier manually. We did a manual deployment of this. And an example of the naming convention by default. Then within that software update group, we've got some updates. Now, we should, again, this is something that's still tripping me up. I can't look at my deployment in the console, in the software library node, per se, to see how it's faring. I can see that I have a deployment, right?
Well, on the summer, you do have a small, just overall count, but that's it.
Yeah, but I don't get much detail. So if I really want to monitor my security compliance, which is the last step in my security software update process, I have to go to the monitoring node, and then from there I need to locate my deployment, and then I can collapse all at this level. I can take a look and see how that is progressing. All right.
One other thing to mention on software update groups, you will find when you go through the wizard and you make all your settings, if you go back and look at properties, there are some settings you can't change after that, such as the path of the package content source location, things like that. So there are a few things that if you decide you need to change that in your automatic deployment rule, you have to actually recreate the ADR.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then something else that I did not want to forget to mention. There is a brand new shiny log file, which I'm so happy, because it's not like we don't have too many log files to look at, right, Greg?
Correct.
Where am I? Why can't I find the directory?
I just installed default. It's a program
Oh,
file.
you do, okay, see, we change our default location, so
It's the other one.
Oh, it's the other one, that's the client, that's right.
Microsoft Configuration Manager.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
All right, CCM. Nope, that wasn't it.
Logs.
Oh, yeah, duh. I had a little too much fun last night, so I'm not as sharp as I'm generally accustomed to being. Anyway.
A lot of pirates hanging out across the street, I guess.
Yes, there were a lot of pirates.
Yes.
Arr. Anyway, this is this is the new log, the new shiny log that you get to look at. It's the rules engine log. This is the first place you're going to go if you're trying to troubleshoot your automatic deployment rule. You want to validate that it's running on an expected schedule. If it's having any trouble getting the catalog or processing your search filter criteria. This one's got an awful lot of red bleed in it, but obviously that's because it's demo box and we can't get stuff down.
Right. We can't get to the internet from here. One other thing I meant to mention when I was talking about settings, there is an additional tab when you configure software update point where you can configure any proxy and authentication information that's required to get to the internet to run.
Right. Okay. All right. So that's that. All right, that's the end of the demo.
Back to the PowerPoint.
Indeed. Okay. All right, so just a little bit of a summary. Rules, remember minus is your friend. All right, that is your not operator for excluding things. You can remember to schedule your ADR with WSUS synchronization in mind, and of course the log file, the new fun one. And then, of course, be very careful about determining your ADR deployment target. Because the one thing ADRs are sure to do is they are going to run, all right? So make sure that you've got, I'm ultra careful about not rebooting the business in the middle of the business day.
Because none of us have done that, right?
No.
Okay.
All right.
My hand is up, by the way. Go on.
Okay, so 2012 has introduced some new and interesting and fun features. And I thought this would kind of be an amusing way to kind of frame this. Pirates versus ninjas in a fight, who would win? I personally know who would win, but we might have a little disagreement about that. I like to think of Pirates as SCUP and Ninjas as the application model.
Angie, what is SCUP?
SCUP is System Center Updates Publisher.
I don't know if we were actually mentioned that before, so maybe a quick description of that.
Right. And this was available with 2007. For those who are not familiar with the System Center Updates Publisher, and I think Steve Ray, who has an awesome deep dive session tomorrow, essentially it was our ability to create custom updates that we can inject into our config manager environment. So thereby giving us the ability to patch third-party applications.
Yeah, and with the whole new application model, there's some different challenges that you've got to be aware of. And so we spent some time to try to determine what the best way to, or what is the best way to patch those app model applications.
Right, because the application model is introducing, and I would believe Microsoft is actually positioning the app model as a new means of updating applications. Okay.
We have audio too. Pirates versus ninjas.
So to answer that question, all right.
Pirates, of course.
And I'll give you a reason why. For those of you that know me.
That is not me on the right. Okay? Go ahead, Angie.
I've got two little eccentricities, all right? One of those is pirates, and the other is pugs. So I always try to sneak something in. Okay. Greg, you want to take this?
Sure. All right, so System Center Updates Publisher, just a little bit more about System Center Updates Publisher. You can use that, like Angie said, to patch, and the way you do that is you publish it into WSUS on a local config manager server. There's a little certificate stuff you have to mess with as well. But after that, it's the normal software updates experience. So we just want to talk a little bit about that, and again, like we're talking about patching applications. And I think we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail.
Okay.
Hand me the wand. Thank you. Okay, so my apologies. It's really hard for me to keep terminology right. I think application is the official term. I like to say app model or application model because sometimes people say application when it could have been a packaged program, right? So I've tried to say software and application, but I'm still getting used to that. So you'll probably hear me say app model, and I mean applications in Config Manager 2012. Okay, so there are obviously some more moving parts in an application, or can be, depending on how you configure those. You might have multiple deployment types, which means multiple detection methods and other things like that. So if you were to go in and modify an existing application because there's a new version or a new patch to that application, obviously you're modifying something that's existing, and if you're targeting, you might have to take some special care because of how you're targeting systems. And we're going to put a little GUI out here to describe it a little bit. So you could, in your application model, create a dependency. So you say you have app version 1, and then there's a version 1.1 patch that comes out, right? You could create a new application for that version 1.1 and make a dependency on 1.0 so that when you deploy 1.1, the application looks to see if 1.0 is installed, and if not, it would install that and then install 1.1. And then when 1.2 comes out, you kind of follow that same method. Obviously, that's a bit of chaining. That's a little bit of overhead. That's not my desired way to handle it. All right, you can also supersede, which when you supersede, basically each one of these is a complete replacement of the previous, right? So I'm on version 1.0, and when a new patch comes out, maybe I go to my packaging team and they create a new package for version 1.1. Sometimes it's just a wrapper, right? Sometimes it might be the original install plus, the patch. You make a whole new application of just that. When you do that, I mean, in that environment, you could have 1.0 and 1.1 happily, in the same environment, targeting different collections or whatever. But the end state is that you would just be targeting 1.1, and you could supersede 1.0. And so on, all the way up to version 2.0.
Aha!
Now,
the
there's
best
also
for last.
SCUP. The best for
the
last.
best for
Yes.
last.
So with SCUP, this is how we're looking to do it in our environment. And I'll kind of talk through this just a little bit more. So you have your app, version 1.0. It's an application. So remember, when you create an application, you have detection rules on that. It's very important when you write detection rules because by default, on a weekly interval, an application does a reevaluation to see if the app is still installed. So for example, this is my app 1.0. If you did a mandatory deployment to your HR group, right? It's supposed to be installed. Your intent is that it's installed on a weekly basis. The app model will check to see if that application is still installed. If it's not, it will force a reinstall of it. So that detection rule is the key to make sure that you have right. So in this scenario, when you use SUP to apply the patch, well, if you changed whatever value that detection rule was looking for, all of a sudden, Config Manager is not going to think that that application is installed, and it's going to attempt to reinstall it. So it's really important, if you're going to use some type of model like this, you have to test to make sure that it's not affecting your original application detection rule. Now, a lot of times, if it's a Windows installer-based installation, that product code for the application generally remains the same when you patch, not always, but it remains the same. But if you've added your own detection rules, like if you're looking for a specific file and version, right, and that patch updates that file, then all of a sudden you can be in a situation. The other thing that's interesting to think about with this, remember I said your application deployment reevaluation cycle runs every 7 days. Kind of like hardware inventory, software inventory, it's that random every 7 days. So if you have a testing team that tests your SCUP update and everything looks successful, all of a sudden, 3 days later, 5 days later, then they see something wrong. So there's something inside the console, and I'll try to remember showing you when we go back. Just like how you can refresh machine policy and other things, there's a new item in there so you can initiate an action for an application deployment evaluation cycle. So that's something that you should probably add to all your testing scenarios just to ensure that you don't get a surprise 5 days later or 7 days later. So this is how we're looking to do it. Like I said, those detection rules are real important to make sure that they're written in a way that that you're not going to affect them when you patch.
Right. A real world use case scenario of this particular example would be Adobe Reader in our environment. So Adobe dropped 10.0.1 on us, right? And then a little more down the road, they decided to drop 10.1.0. And now, and in between those releases, they dropped MSP patches, right? So that's just to give you a specific example. So the MSIs, because they're more than just a single binary payload, we actually use a transform to control some of the settings in our Adobe Reader, is ideally suited for an application model type deployment. But an MSP is something that's very natural and native to System Center Update Publisher, and it just makes better sense because in a lot of ways, those are considered security updates, not necessarily functional updates that Adobe Reader is dropping on us. So we'd want to use the native MSP and have that published via SCUP. And then if we got a new MSI, obviously then we'd want to
create a new application.
Create a new application.
Right. It's kind of weird in my mind to think of creating a new application to deploy a patch. So depends on your environment and what you're doing. Applications that don't update very often, maybe you invest that time to create a new application when a point release comes out. Other things that do update more than 2 or 3 times a year, you may want to consider another patching process and then kind of keep on the major revisions for whenever you actually create a new application.
Hey, we got to the demo this time. All right.
Okay, I'll start with just a couple things here real quick. Since we talked about them, I want to point these out. So this is in Software Center on the local system. You can enable a client to manage these types of settings. I just wanted to mention a couple things about this. So by default, it actually looks like that by default. Can I do this? Let's try it. Oh yeah, how about that? All right, so by default, these business working hours are from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. Basically, you can allow an end user to say, these are my work hours. Okay, so that's great. And then, under computer maintenance, there's another magical checkbox. It says automatically install or uninstall required software and restart only outside of my work hours. Okay, so that's great. Basically, you can kind of think of it as a local maintenance window. I'll call it that. So the way this looks by default, basically 10 p.m. every night, other than all day on Saturday, Sunday, at 10 p.m. you could install patches. Now the way this works, if a user has selected this checkbox to automatically install or uninstall, And say in our scenario, right, we make patches available on Wednesday, but 2 a.m. Friday is whenever they're going to go mandatory. The settings that you can set here will never overrule whatever the admin set for the deadline of patching. So it doesn't matter what's set in here. If you reach that deadline, you're still going to patch. But for that user that is working all day on Wednesday that has these settings configured, come 10 p.m. local time Wednesday evening, that system will patch and reboot if required. So keep that in mind. It is a way to enable users to kind of control a little bit more themselves. Basically, you're allowing them to install patches in advance in a schedule that fits their needs. So it's just really important to remember that this isn't overruling any configuration manager maintenance windows or mandatory deadlines that you configure. I won't save changes. Okay, I did just want to go in real quick and just point out in applications. I'm just going to open one up here and we can mention a couple things on it. When you supersede an application, you are superseding one application with another application, right? So that version 1.0 to 1.1, if you want to make 1.1 do everything that 1.0 did previously, you supersede by going in here with your version 1.1. Now, if you want to leverage the app model to actually create dependencies, which means I still need to install that 1.0, but here's the patch for 1.1. On your 1.1 application, you would actually create your dependency in here. You can kind of think of it as that run another program first that happens with programs, with classic package programs, but it's not exactly the same, right? I'm curious to see how many people have done a run another program first, that runs another program first, that runs another program first. Yep, there's a few of us. Okay. So just something to point out, and this isn't specific to what we're talking about for patching here, but you can create these dependencies in here, and you can add multiple ones. So you make these little dependency groups. And if you make multiple dependencies in one application, it's not deterministic which one will run first. So if order really matters to you, you have to have this application depend on a different application, that application depend on a different application. I hope that makes sense. If you put them all in one box, it's non-deterministic. You know, some of them may not even run because of the app model. If they're already installed, then great. It can detect that and just move on. Let's see, I think that's all I had there, Angie. I'll hand it to you.
Oh, okay. All right, just a quick look at the System Center Updates Publisher console. All right, so essentially with this, we're creating updates, which is essentially an XML that defines a single binary payload with some detection rules around it. And again, those detection rules are exactly like the detection rules that you would be defining in the application model. And then it's going to inject it into your WSUS environment, which can then be consumed by Config Manager. Now again, I really do want to point this out. So you see I have an Adobe Reader English 10.1.0 that I packaged using SUP. And this is how we had to do it in 2007 because we didn't have, obviously, the application model. We use a transform to control certain reader updates, right? First of all, we don't want the reader application phoning home to the Adobe mothership to get updates, right? And a couple of other things, we need to restrict access to the public Adobe website where you can share content and collaborate, because obviously we don't want corporate documents out on some sort of public sharing. So we accomplished that using a transform, and I know I've seen a lot of blog entries and posts. I think on SourceForge, they do have some group policy ADM templates that you can download to control that behavior as well. So essentially what I have to do, if I want to deploy a reader update using SUP, that's an MSI based, because every time we get a new MSI, I've got to be thinking about reiterating those corporate policy settings that we want set on that reader, on that particular installation of reader. I need to put it in a wrapper. I use SMS installer to build the wrapper, and essentially what it does, it's very, very simple. I've got a blog post out there, actually, I believe, on it, is it calls the MSI for reader along with and passes the transform on the command line, and that's actually that's all it does, and then that's all wrapped up in that little executable wrapper. But so the really interesting thing here is you have your installable rules and then your installed rules. And again, if you look, when you're creating applications, and hopefully some of you have had a chance to attend one of the app model sessions that's done a technical deep dive as far as that goes, is, you know, essentially the same type of rules, MSI, product codes, Windows system like processor architecture, OS. You can even do WMI queries. All right.
One thing to mention with SUP that you currently cannot deploy are .msu files, unless you're the queen, and I think there's a blog post pending for how to...
it's pending, yes.
Pending for how to make that happen. So newer updates like for Windows 7 and things like that that are .msu, you can't even wrap them in an exe and deploy them. There's something with Windows and automatic updates, and it just doesn't like that. So okay. Back to slides.
All right. So essentially, just to summarize what we've covered in the demo, so the application model, we've tried to give you some use case scenarios with that. Again, the other advantage to using the application model is, of course, if you have a multiple file payload. So if you have an MSI with a transform, or you have an executable with a cab file, you know, et cetera, instead of having to try and engineer a wrapper in order to deliver that versus the custom updates process. The only time you may want to not consider the application model, although the application model does have compliance, is if you want, or the business wants, whatever you're updating to show in a consolidated report. So if you have a security office that says, I want to see the new reader version as a compliant security item, then you might want to consider that. The better option for you is to use the custom update publishing. And of course, with the app model, you have both user and machine targeted, and you can have multiple deployment types. The difference, of course, with your custom updates is, again, the biggest pain point is the single binary payload. It's only machine targeted for updates, and every update that you create is a single deployment based on rules detection. So in the application model, you could have a deployment type for your 32-bit box and your 64 OS, but in SUP you'd actually have to have 2 updates.
And also, you know, just like this morning how Bill showed in the keynote, you can do the simulate deployment with app model as well. Might give you a little better view of what's going to happen when you do deploy.
All right, I've collected some. This is by no means an exhaustive list. We've all seen the session catalog, but I went through the session catalog and I got some related sessions that I think you might find interesting and useful. So some of them have already happened. Like I said, tomorrow Steve Rehu is doing a deep dive into custom update publisher. So encourage you to attend that because I'm sure that's going to be awesome. So yeah, please go ahead and check those out. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations. You can win really cool, neat prizes, or so I'm told. I've never won. But anyway, and we're going to be heading to the Ask the Speaker area next to registration if you have questions and would like to relax with a cold beverage. Anyway, thank you for listening to us. We both enjoyed presenting.
Thank you. Thank you.